We'll call the meeting to order. Please rise for pledge allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
It's caught underneath. Ask for a moment of silence, please. Okay, I want to thank you all. Welcome, everybody. Also, anybody that'll be watching later or is viewing now. We'll start roll call. Today I'm going to start with Commissioner Culberson.
Here.
Commissioner Collins.
Here.
I'm here. Commissioner Smith.
Here.
Commissioner Stephen.
Here.
Okay, make sure phones are on silent, please. Public comment. I don't have any. I have somebody at the end of it, I believe. Mark, do you have anything?
Commissioners, I don't have anything this morning. There's
about the
the proclamation to your head.
What's that?
He just had the operation green light. That was it.
Yeah, I'm doing that. Commissioners, y'all have anything before I move on?
I just, mentioned last week about the $4 million grant that the Guidance Center received.
Yeah.
I forgot to thank everybody that had anything to do with that grant. I mean, that's a complicated process to get a federal grant.
Absolutely.
They had to work extremely hard. I mean, I know we sent a letter of support,
Yeah.
but that was on the first one that got denied, I believe. But that's the staff out there and Keith and everybody, I think it just needs to, everybody acknowledge how hard they worked to get this money.
They did.
Those federal grants are tough. You're absolutely
Yeah.
right.
They worked their buns off.
Yeah. That's a success story. I was glad to hear it. Okay, if nothing else, we'll go to administrative business. I have a proclamation supporting Operation Greenlight for Veterans. Whereas the residents of Leavenworth County have great respect, admiration, and utmost gratitude for all the men and women who have selflessly served our country and this community in the armed forces. And whereas the contributions and sacrifice of the men and women who served in the armed forces have been vital in maintaining the freedoms and way of life enjoyed by our citizens. And whereas Leavenworth County seeks to honor these individuals who have paid the high price for freedom by placing themselves in harm's way for the good of all. And whereas veterans continue to serve our community in the American Legion, veterans of foreign wars, religious groups, civil service, and by functioning as county veteran service officers in 29 states to help fellow former service members access more than $52 billion in federal health, disability, and compensation benefits each year. Whereas approximately 200,000 service members transition to civilian communities annually, and whereas an estimated 20% increase of service members will transition to civilian life in the near future. And where studies indicate that 44 to 72% of service members experience high levels of stress during transition from military to civilian life. And whereas active military service members transitioning from military service are at a high risk for suicide during their first year after military service. And whereas the National Association of County encourages all counties, parishes, and boroughs to recognize Operation Greenlight for veterans, and whereas the Leavenworth County appreciates the sacrifices of our United States military personnel and believe specific recognition should be granted before be it resolved with designation as Greenlight for Veterans County. Leavenworth County hereby declares from October through Veterans Day, November 11, 2022, a time to salute and honor the service and sacrifice of our men and women in uniform transitioning from active service. Therefore, it be further resolved that in the observance of Operation Greenlight, Leavenworth County encourages its citizens and patriotic tradition to recognize the importance of honoring all others who have made immeasurable services to preserve freedom by displaying a green light in a window of their place of business or residence. Michael W. Smith, Leavenworth County Commission. Anybody else want to say anything? I think it's excellent. Can't thank those folks enough for what they've done, the sacrifices they've made.
And thank you for getting the building lit up for us from the Rounds Division.
There's some new utility light things going in as far as the power sources outside the building. Okay. All right. Does any other commissioner have anything before we move on? Okay, I'll move on to consent agenda. Is there any item on the consent agenda that needs to be pulled? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we accept the consent agenda as presented.
Second?
Motion is second. Any more discussion? Commissioner Culberson?
Aye.
Commissioner Collins?
Aye.
I vote aye. Commissioner Smith?
Aye.
Commissioner Stephen?
Aye.
Very good. We'll go to formal board action. Consider a motion to approve a contract with Gary Seifert to auction items of the Council on Aging for a public sale and remaining property be declared surplus. Morning.
Good morning. As you know, we're moving. So
We've heard that a little bit.
after a long wait, we're really excited to be moving into that building. So we have tentatively arranged to have an auction with Gary Seifert, but I'm looking for approval to have the items declared as surplus so we could offer an on-site public sale at the Council on Aging the weekend of December 3rd.
And Commissioners, anything that's left out there probably falls under the guidance of being completely depreciated and having no value. But just to be safe, we wanted to have it declared as surplus and approve the contract.
Commissioners?
I just know Mr. Seifert and Bud Showalter all do a lot for Council on Aging.
They always have.
They always have.
Yep, they do.
They offer their services for free for
Right.
benefits and things like that, and I'm happy to send this business their way.
I agree totally. So with that, you ready for a motion? Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve a contract with Gary Seifert to auction the items on Council on Aging for public sale and the remaining property to be declared surplus.
Second.
Motion is second. Any discussion? Commissioner Culberson?
Aye.
Commissioner Collins?
Aye.
I vote aye. Commissioner Smith?
Aye.
Commissioner Stephen?
Aye.
Thank you.
Hey, Connie, just on a
Thank
side
you.
note, I had a great time at the Halloween judging. Those folks did a great job.
Yeah, that's
Your
one of our
staff and the
favorites.
people that dressed up. That was fun.
Yes.
Count me in again.
Okay, we'll do it.
Unless Vicki steals it from me, but they count me in again. Thank you.
Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Item B, consider a motion to approve Resolution 2022-2026, amending Articles 19 and 25 of the 2006 Leavenworth County Zoning and Subdivision Regulations. Good morning, Crystal.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. You may recall a couple of months ago we had a work session regarding the sign regulations. We'd had a work session with our Planning Commission, and we had a public hearing, of course. These sign regulations that are before you are those regulations that we brought to you. There were a couple of minor changes that had been asked for. The Planning Commission, we got those incorporated. The biggest changes are that we are clearly regulating only time, place, and manner in these regulations. We have made it so that every property owner can have one property sign, no more than 32 square feet. It can't be more than 10 feet tall, but we don't say anything about off-site signs anymore or anything like that, just one property sign, 32 square feet. And then also we have clarified what a temporary sign is. A temporary sign for 30 days, a total of 90 days throughout the course of the year on your property, but it can only be up for 30 days at a time. So, political signs or advertising some sort of an event or something on your property, 30 days, take it down for a couple weeks, put it back up, take it down for a day and put it back up, but 90 days throughout the course of the year. And then we also have adopted or put in here sign regulations for billboards that very much mirror what our surrounding cities have for size, height, materials, and such, so that we can make sure that should those areas ever be incorporated, that any signs that would be in those areas would meet their existing code. And then also in Article 19, we had our boat sales and RV storage. We didn't have RVs in there. I don't know how that happened. It had always been in before, so we just have updated that so that it's clear, it's in there. There are no inconsistencies there. The Planning Commission recommended to approve this, and obviously staff is supportive of it.
Commissioners?
On our boat storage and repair, is there any way we can collect the taxes on boats that are parked in Leavenworth County on January 1, like it says? Counselor?
That'd be through operation of law, Commissioner. If the appraiser's office wished to, on January 1st, go out and look for those boats, they could
Isn't
assess
that what the
taxes.
law says? If that's where they're parked in our county, we're supposed to collect the taxes on them?
Yes, it is.
I believe I voted for a boat storage place because of that. I don't think we've seen one dime. Just saying.
That's good.
No, sir.
Any other commissioner?
I voted no.
I remember. Let's not go there. Okay.
Well, I mean,
No, I voted for Doug.
I'm telling you, I'm just saying. I mean, didn't want to turn down the tax dollars, but we never got it.
That's why I voted no.
Okay. If there's another question, I'll take a motion.
I did have one more.
Yeah, go ahead, Doug.
And then the sign, even if the property's zoned, it still falls, if it's zoned for B3 or if industrial, the sign's still the same?
No, so you, depending upon the intensity of your zoning district,
Okay.
your sign regulations get progressively
Okay.
less stringent, if you will.
All right. That's
So,
what.
yeah, industrial properties could have bigger signs, B3, B2.
And then the state doesn't regulate political signs. We can have our own on political signs.
The state does have some guidance on political signs. You can be stricter. But so
Not that anybody follows it
So
on
here's
political
the-
signs. I mean,
so
I know that.
right, then that's the thing. So there is no such thing when you specifically call out political signs, you are regulating content, and you
Right.
cannot regulate
That's-
content, and that's why we've just said temporary signs. Our regulations, we believe, are constitutional because we do not call out any sorts of
Includes all.
differentiations between temporary signs. There is case law that this United States Supreme Court that made it very clear.
Right.
And so our regulations are in line with that. Whether or not the state's regulations are in line with that is up for interpretation.
David?
Commissioners, I think your staff did a very good job, as did the Planning Commission, in rendering to you a neutral or a content-neutral set of sign regulations. Crystal's statement is correct. We cannot regulate content of speech, and a sign is considered speech. It's my opinion these regulations meet the constitutional standards.
Okay. That's all we need. No, sir.
Anybody else? And I'll entertain a motion.
Motion to approve case number DEV-22-047. That's the amendment to the 2006 Leavenworth County Zoning and Subdivision Regulations, Article 19 and 25.
I'll second it.
Motion is second. Any more discussion?
Resolution.
Yeah, it's ready to be, if you read it,
Okay.
if you just go right off that.
Motion to approve Resolution 22-26, amending Articles 19 and 25 of the 2006 Leavenworth County Zoning and Subdivision Regulations. That's what I said. Okay.
I'll second it.
Okay, motion is second. Any more discussion?
I'd just like to
Go ahead, Mike.
thank the Crystal and her department for working on this so hard.
Thank you. My staff did a tremendous job.
Yeah, some of these can be pretty challenging.
A lot of time researching.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Okay, Commissioner Culberson?
Aye.
Commissioner Collins?
Aye.
I vote aye. Commissioner Smith?
Aye.
Commissioner Stevens?
Aye.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen.
Thanks.
Consider a motion to approve the renewal with Symmetry Energy Solutions for December 1st, 2022 through November 30th, 2023. Morning.
Good
Morning, Commissioners. As you know, we buy our gas not directly from like the gas company. We buy it from a broker. I went through our contract that we have with Symmetry currently. They sent their proposed rates to us. I went through, they based their calculations on a 3-year average. The problem is the 3-year average that we have, 1, it was an empty building, 2, we were under construction. We do pay if our month goes over at the daily rate. Last year, the only month that I increased for us was December because the 3-year average was significantly lower than last year, so I raised our unit that month by 200 to match last year's unit, so that way our daily rate wasn't as high. You will see that we incurred about a 16% increase in services. We did negotiate down the cost for demand. The demand is the storage on the line itself for us to allocate units. They would not negotiate the rate down, but they would negotiate the demand cost down. So we pushed the demand cost down as far as we could. I had them look at that again, and then they resent it over. Basically, this is just formal action since it spans 2 calendar years, the 22 into 23, that I need you guys to approve us to move forward with the contract.
Yeah. Okay, commissioners?
We spend a lot of money, don't we?
It is
I
what it
cannot
is.
keep
Yeah,
the
we
building.
can't, yeah. We,
Don't want to start cutting wood.
Okay, if there's no, I'll take a motion from anybody wants to make it. Okay.
motion to approve the renewal with Synergy Energy Solutions for December 1st, 2022 through November 30th, 2023.
Second.
Motion and second. Any more discussion? Mr. Culberson?
Aye.
Mr. Collins?
Aye.
I vote aye. Commissioner Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Stephen?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank
you,
you.
Aaron.
Thank you, Aaron.
Okay, we're up to presentations. It's got quarterly reports, adult and juvenile community corrections. Good morning.
Good morning. Well, as you can see on our adult side, we are slowing down on our case closures this past quarter. We're at about a 33% success rate and 33% revocation rate. So honestly, that's pretty good for where we're typically at. It could be worse, and we're really working with our community partners and resources to try to improve, the success of our clients and also just their overall well-being and get them the help that they need. We did not get our behavioral health grant funding that we applied for through KDOC, and so we did have to modify and remove the goals related to implementing in-house programs for the adults for substance abuse, anger management, and other change programs for people who are struggling with trauma and substance use.
Do you think there's any reason we didn't get that grant? There's too many people at their hand in the kettle, or?
Well, several factors. Honestly, the adult side, our budget never increases really, and for us to receive any of the behavioral health grant funding on the adult side, they'd have to take that funding from another agency. I know they are going to be looking at agencies and evaluating the effectiveness of how those funds are being utilized and if they're meeting program goals. But I continue to pound the pavement, and I do plan to go after opiate settlement funds from the state. And so I'm staying on top of that and tracking data because that is geared straight for people who are struggling with addiction, and that's like 90% of everyone on probation is struggling with addiction. So
Very good. Thank you.
we have plans. Otherwise, we are moving right along on our other goals as far as like our referrals to Johnson County programs that they're doing virtually, sending them to substance abuse treatment immediately from sentencing, as well as monitoring caseload sizes. Our only challenge that we've had is really turnover, and we're going to be looking to work with HR to implement some pre-employment testing to make sure we have people who are the right fit, and so that we can get some stability over there. But otherwise, for our adults, that's all I have. If any of you have questions.
Questions?
I do have a question.
Michael, go ahead. Go.
When you're talking about substance abuse, and you're talking about 90% of your folks struggle with that, are we talking about alcohol primarily, or are we talking about marijuana and lighter drugs, or are we talking about hard drugs?
All of the drugs.
All the above.
I mean,
And alcohol
is there
as well.
any one that dominates? I mean, is alcohol the if you were going to say what is preeminent?
I wouldn't say alcohol is the thing that we see the most on UAs. Obviously, THC, the methamphetamines, fentanyl is a huge issue here. When I first got here, I noticed a lot of ecstasy, less PCP than Wyandotte, but interesting that there's more fentanyl and ecstasy here. And we do have a 19-panel test, which is higher than Johnson County, Wyandotte, Atchison. So we're testing for a lot. Also coming from drug courts, I'm somebody who likes to stay up on drug trends. So, testing for synthetic cannabinoids and kratom and other substances that, clients are getting smart and trying to beat drug tests. So, and I don't know if, we witness all of our UAs over here, and sometimes they get them by us. Aaron's staff pulled a fake container of urine out of our toilet someone had shoved down there. So people are really trying to
Kind of sneaky, huh?
to sneak around and continue to use, and we don't have any cognitive programs for that. So
Let me ask you this: if you come back, just for me to know, if it comes back positive of what it's not supposed to be, do you retest, or is that just the final test?
So by statute, the only way we can put that on a revocation motion or affidavit is if it is GCMS confirmed or if they admit to the initial test. Most of us can get clients to admit, that they were using through motivational interviewing and just building rapport so that they understand, this is an opportunity for us to help you. Like, the only people you're hurting by lying is yourself, and getting the treatment that you need and building the skills and accessing resources. But sometimes they deny, and they can pay to get a second test, which is a GCMS confirmation, and that breaks it down to the exact levels. And it can also come back and say, oh, this is a false positive. Their Adderall or Concerta or whatever came back as meth.
So one thing that's popular in many of the surrounding states even is the the use of medicinal marijuana, or even in some states recreational marijuana. Have you seen a trend increasing as far as the marijuana percentages?
Honestly,
THC
I think
or no?
THC has pretty much always been there, but that's not the predominant issue that we're having with people who are really struggling and not able to work and not, going to be successful on probation. Alcohol is legal, and marijuana is obviously legal in a lot of states, or, at least medicinally. But even in those states, you can't use it on probation. Alcohol is legal, and you can't use that on probation. And so what we mainly still struggle with are the street drugs and people also abusing prescription drugs. So those also pop, and if people can't bring in prescriptions, we know, you're taking someone else's medication or buying this from someone else, and if it's not one thing, it's another. Replacement addiction is real. When I worked in the drug court and mental health court, we would see people stop using methamphetamines. They would stop using their drug of choice, and they would replace it with alcohol, or they would replace it with benzos or something else that they could abuse.
And would you say, compared to other counties, that we're in the same range as far as methamphetamine use, or where we fall in that county?
I would say pretty average. I would say the concern that I've had since I came here is fentanyl.
Fentanyl.
Well, okay.
And we read about this fentanyl that's coming in that has, flavored fentanyl and colored fentanyl.
Right. And hearing from law enforcement, they're lacing everything with fentanyl, cutting cocaine with fentanyl. They're warning people who don't even use opiates, like, hey, whatever drug you're using, it can all be cut with fentanyl, because people don't care. Drug dealers don't care. So it's just unfortunate, but they're highly addictive drugs, and people who are struggling, they're going to try to utilize something.
Well, thank you for all you do to deal with these things.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it.
Chain reaction. Starts with the mental health, cutting funds, and
Yeah.
That's just
just
what I
goes on down the line, and then when they overdose, we get and die from it. We get to pay for the autopsies. Taxpayers do.
Yeah.
It's just
We were at a criminal justice panel yesterday for the University of Missouri, Kansas City, and talking to them and talking to criminal justice students who haven't declared yet their major but are interested, and they got to talk to criminal justice practitioners and ask us questions about, is it rewarding? Can you make money? But a lot of them asked questions about, how hard it is to see the people who we have resources for, but they're not ready for help. And one of the conversations was that trauma is the real gateway drug. It's trauma, it's mental health, it's kids who are good kids who tear an ACL and can't go play baseball at the school that was recruiting them. And, it's your emotions that you can't control. And it can start with, dental procedures and taking Oxy, just like alcohol abuse. You're having a beer at the end of the day and it turns into 6 or a whole case. Before you know it, it's chemical. And so, awareness is super important. And for our adults in the state of Kansas, there's not enough funding for mental health and drug treatment or alcohol treatment. And alcohol is one of the hardest substances to treat. In our drug court, we didn't want to deal with people who had alcohol use because what can you say? It is legal. The first thing they ask you when you sit down for dinner at Applebee's is, what can I get you to drink? This is our happy hour special. So
I think what has been said, I think Doug has said too, is a lot of these things you and the other folks have to work together because it's in stages. Mental health is a key thing on this. This fentanyl thing has always bothered me tremendously, especially when people didn't know it can be laced and how deadly that drug can be. So definitely got your hands full. I appreciate what you do and your staff. Anything else?
Well, I had one more thing. When we had the breakfast in Tonganoxie, you discussed the halfway houses or were folks that need to go, like the transitional
sober
housing. Where are we at on that, or has there been an improvement, or are we still in need? Or
we're definitely still in need. I have been talking to Miranda and people from the mental health task force about our situation and really needing Oxford housing. I've also been informed that the people who run our nonprofit in the state of Kansas, who typically lease Oxford houses for sobriety housing, they've actually begun buying properties instead of leasing them. So I know the first one they bought was in Wyandotte, and getting in touch with them so that they can make connections with landlords here and get to know what the Oxford housing model is all about. So, it's just one day at a time, and the housing that will, hopefully be able to assist our clients with co-occurring disorders through the guidance center and just anything that we can do in the future to help people who are struggling, who they might not be able to live at home with their family because sometimes it's a family affair.
Yeah. All righty. Any other questions? Anything else?
The juvenile report?
Yeah.
There's the juvenile report.
Yeah, I know. I do now. Go ahead.
All right. Since we took over juvenile intake on March 1st of 2021, we have served 344 kids. 80 of them are from Atchison County, 264 are Leavenworth youth. We continue to improve, our data tracking and our process as we learn more about the manpower that's required for juvenile intake. And this has been something that's been heavily discussed at our JCABs. So we're hopeful that we can get something worked out with Atchison shortly for them to take some, add some help for their own youth.
That concerns how that's working right now.
So I'm hopeful that the new director will come in and be able to look at their budget and find it, the money somewhere so that they can begin covering the after hours on calls. So I'm very hopeful I'm sure we can discuss like that further at a work session. As far as our juvenile quarterly report, we've only had 6 closures. We continue to struggle with family engagement and parental buy-in. Again, sometimes the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, and we only have these youth for a short amount of time because we have very short juvenile probation terms. And in that amount of time, sometimes we can only do so much, but if the parents do not reinforce the values that we're trying to sell to these youth about honesty and doing the right thing and, you know, accessing treatment and help and going to school, sometimes, you know, that's just, the parents have more influence and we can't be there to parent the kids for them.
And one thing else too is that nowadays parents have to let the young people face their consequences and not give them an out. Because when you give them an out, that just reinforces that I'm going to be doing this again. And I see a lot of that going on. My child, it's a one-time deal. My child would never do that. No, let that young person be responsible for their actions.
Right, and it's difficult as a parent also to hold your kid accountable and not go to the functions. And, you know, that's something we're working on, is being able to provide those resources for parents through our prevention grant. We have Parent Project, which is a course that is for adults, parents, caregivers only, and helps them deal with difficult behaviors. But in September, we also got certified to teach Strengthening Families program, which is for caregivers and parents who have 10 to 14-year-olds. And it's a 7-week course, and it involves the kids learning empathy the first hour, and then the adults going and learning firm parenting, firm but caring. And learning how, you know, that wimpy parenting doesn't teach their kids to be accountable and responsible, but also harsh and critical parenting can do the same thing and lead them to substance use. And it's the #1 intervention to improve family function as well as reduce substance use with kids. And there's no risk level. And they've done extensive studies with families of kids that, you know, they're going to churches and they're hosting these classes at churches all over the country as well as internationally, and it has great outcomes. So, you know, if you know adults that have kids struggling from 10 to 14, you can refer them to the Youth Justice Resource Center for programs, and hopefully we can improve that function for them. But we also, part of the curriculum is bringing the family together to have dinner at a little table. And just like I said at the JCAB, you know, they had Stouffer's commercials back in the 90s about, you know, popping the casserole in, and talked about just the benefits of having dinner with your family. And people don't do that. They're looking at their phones. Their kids are looking at their tablets.
That's not what else they, you know, the whole thing, you're right.
It's not profound stuff, but it makes a profound difference in who will be the next generation.
Does the state of Kansas have the guidelines changed at all as far as interaction with faith-based organizations and how? Because it seems like in a lot of these issues, the faith-based approach would be a way to address what's right and wrong and those kind of issues. What are the regulations from the state of Kansas?
Well, any program that's utilized through evidence-based program funds has to be approved by the state, and I have not heard one way or the other. That's just not something that is typically requested. I know there was a program that they attempted to utilize in Topeka that got pushed back. It was a discipleship for wayward teenage young men who were struggling with discipline. And I don't believe they were able to utilize state funds because they weren't utilizing an evidence-based curriculum that's manualized. And it was pretty subjective and individualized. So I think if there's something that is faith-based, that has studies and has gone through rigorous testing to show scientific data that it improves outcomes, that's something that obviously could be proposed to the state. It's just a matter of finding that. So, and some of these programs, like Strengthening Family, has been tested in church communities with kids that have no risk. They're already going to church, as well as with, kids at alternative schools and kids in the justice system and their families. So there are certainly those programs that we can use, and they're about morals and establishing values and aligning your behavior to that.
Thank you.
So what do you think the chances of that, Mike?
I got
the
one.
Ten Commandments back
I got
in the
one.
courthouse first?
How do
Where
you
that
keep your,
happens.
being a cop for over 20 years, how do you keep your staff from burning out? How do you keep your staff from burning out on this? Because, when I did 21 years, I handled a lot of these things and referred them. We didn't have a lot of places back then. We just tried to handle ourselves. So it's really hard on folks that are in this field trying to do that. So,
Yeah. Well, the best answer I can give you is if there's ever a struggle, referring people to EAP. We have great EAP benefits here. It does get heavy. We have discussed compassion fatigue. We also have, personal days and holidays, and I always refer people back to taking care of their mental health. They can't pour from an empty cup. And just like everyone in my office, I'm like, if we have paid parental leave, you better go home. You better take care of your wife. You have to take care of your family life. We do flex scheduling. I know the prison went to 410s. We would like to be able to offer 410s or 4.5 days, but staffing and staying consistent has been an issue. But, we do want them to have work-life balance, and the 410 model has been proven to work, especially for people in law enforcement, fire, emergency, or any of the human services fields like probation, parole, social work, because you have to be at work for 4 days and you have 3 days to decompress. So that's something we're trying, but also, the good old-fashioned way, trying not to take life too seriously. Sometimes we have warped senses of humor, but we have to laugh as our coping skill. And,
yeah, that used to get me in trouble as a cop, but you're right. Go ahead.
Right. Well, I always say, we can make jokes, but nothing that will get me in trouble with Mark. So, nothing that goes to
You're
HR.
talking about gallows humor.
Maybe. So,
Okay.
but yeah, it is hard, and I think in this labor market, it's also very hard. People get burnt out in other fields and want to change, but this is still very hard. And I know for the youth, that's always been what I believe is harder, just for the simple fact that you want so much for these kids, but they go home to parents who need just as much resources as they do, and we only have so much time.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else?
Is there any programs for these kids for like any vocational, to get them into kind of vocational training and stuff? 'Cause a lot of them, I'm sure, don't go to school.
A lot of them don't go to school.
That's what I'm saying.
There are GED programs. KCC and the Pioneer Center work with Leavenworth, and they have some training that you can do so that when you leave, you can have skills and job training as well. But there really isn't
Can't be mandated.
It can't be mandated, but I think, really educating parents and understanding, how important getting your high school diploma is, especially as a risk factor for staying not only in the criminal justice system, but living in poverty, and what that will mean for their grandkids if they're not reinforcing the importance of education. And education, I tell my 8-year-old, she's like, I can't wait to be an adult. And I'm like, you go to work every day and pay bills. You get nap time and recess. And I'm like, you don't like the rules at school. I have a boss. And I'm like, if I lie to him or don't do my work, I'm going to get in trouble. School teaches you and, just conditions you that you're going to get up every day and you have a purpose. And hopefully what you're learning in school is going to help you be successful in life with math and health and science. But a lot of it is just conditioning for adulthood.
Hey, how On this 31%, help me understand that. It's like a recidivism rate, or what? Explain that. What does that 31% represent?
So we have 33% of our people are successful, which means they successfully complete probation. And the rest are either closed by the court, get revoked, go to the correctional facility. Unsuccessful can mean a lot of things. On the adult side, we personally consider unsuccesses if our people overdose or they, are killed or something happens. But the state, as long as we're not sending them to prison, counts those as a success. Our data looks different. But on our juvenile side, we're at 33%. We're at the same for our adult side.
So if they die and they don't go back to prison, for the state, that's write that one off.
We write that one off because on the juvenile side, it costs about $500 or something to incarcerate a kid. We haven't lost any of our kids. We lose adults. It's very unfortunate. Sometimes we wouldn't know that they died if not for law enforcement letting us know that they responded to a code black. But it does happen. Addiction doesn't discriminate, and it can lead to overdoses, and that's very unfortunate. We've heard people plead to be in the community and get a chance on probation and tell the judge that they don't want their mom to find them, and they have the best of intentions and they want to be successful, but they still can't beat it. So, and that's definitely that compassion fatigue and someone's kid.
And how is the court backlog affecting any of this? Is there quite a bit of a backlog?
I think the court is doing everything they can to catch back up from COVID, and honestly, we've slowed down all of the cases that we were just getting all of the time. So I think it's more stable now, and I'm hopeful that it will stay stable and we're not going to get an influx of clients. That's the last thing we need.
Right.
So.
You'll rather spend the money on prevention than all
Right.
this other stuff.
Yeah.
And it is $5 a day for someone to be on probation. Like I said, almost $500 a day to put someone in juvenile facility, and about $200 a day for the adults. And that's for healthy inmates. That's not including people who need mental health meds or dialysis and Hep C or cancer treatment or whatever else.
Is there any studies out there on prevention, dollars versus?
There are many
That's
studies.
kind of what I figured, but I mean, you can just do it in your head thinking for what the courts cost, what everything costs on the probation side,
Yeah.
all this.
One mental health study stated that for every dollar you put towards mental health treatment in a community, you save $19 on incarceration fees for every dollar.
That's what I'm saying.
And imagine the reduced liability of people who aren't incarcerated, going into jail in crisis, attacking juvenile or detention officers on the adult or the juvenile side. In my mental health court, we dealt with a lot of people who had violent histories because when they're in crisis and having psychotic breaks, they're scared. And just like when animals are scared, they bite.
Fight or flight.
Fight or flight. And, even on the drug court side of things, we had people who had violent histories, but by getting clean and sober and stabilizing their mental health, they're able to have clear, rational choices, and they're not assaulting their loved ones. They're not stealing from their family members and their neighbors. They're going back to work. They're raising their kids. They're, trying to break that cycle of abuse, that cycle of addiction, and they're reducing the trauma. But people have to heal, or we just perpetuate it. And for the drug court, I believe for that one, for every dollar, we saved $3. That was just one study, but it's out there, especially on the NADCP website. That's the National Association of Drug Court Programs, and it'll show you the dollar per dollar savings and all of the statistics.
I figured there was plenty of them out there because it's been years on the decline on the money drying up for prevention. It probably goes back to the 80s.
30 years of data
Yeah,
showing
there
that
should be.
we save money and we
On
save
prevention.
because there's also social harm with incarcerating people who aren't violent, but they go to prison, and I worked in there, so I know what happens in there, and it's people have to learn to survive in there as well. There's a reason that Lansing has 50% turnover and a 30% vacancy. People don't want to work there either. Prison isn't the answer. 98% of people are released back into the community, and they don't have any better skills. And if people think they're not using drugs in there and finding ways to mail in stuff,
Always creative.
right, that's a myth.
Yep.
So if, I think everybody's supportive of these programs and doing what we can to enhance the rehabilitation part of it. But if you were kind of happy with the 31%, how do we have programs across the country or anywhere where we're getting? It seems like we need to get that number up
Yes.
to around 70% or 80%.
Yeah.
Do we have examples of that, or is this 31% the norm?
No, the state's minimum is 75%. We have not met that in years. There are communities who have implemented programs that are working, that have, I love my community where I live, but they have better outcomes and more hard criminals and more crime. But those programs and all of the resources that, people just working together, they're not getting a bunch of money. They had no money to start a mental health court or a veterans court. It was just people who, we all had the same goal. And the sheriff's office came and, gave us a deputy to go out and check and do curfew checks. The Wyandotte Center just showed up and gave us case managers. There was no additional funding that went into that. It's just getting the buy-in from all of the stakeholders, many of which who have been doing this for years, and to think people don't get desensitized and calloused at the revolving doors and the faces you see over and over again, that would be naive. And I think it's hard to get people to buy into more progressive interventions and prevention programs because it doesn't look like what we've always done. And those programs are non-adversarial in nature. And even when judges and prosecutors and defense attorneys want to come to the table and do specialty courts, it's still difficult to transition the lens from which you view someone violating probation. Even in drug court, you expect people are going to use, but instead of punishing them for failing, you try to help figure out what is this. Instead of looking at things superficially, you're like, what's going on? Are there drugs in the home? Is it your associates? Do we need to help you get a sponsor? Are you not going to a high enough level of treatment? Do we need to pay for you to live in an Oxford house and take you out of your environment until you build the confidence to say no? Is it as easy as changing your phone number? There's a lot that goes into it, but even communities who want those programs that are proven to work and have good outcomes still struggle with fully embracing them and the adaptation challenges. So I think, and for us with, being down a judge in Atchison, our judges, they're covering up there. We're getting 2 new judges to hopefully reduce some of the cases that they're seeing, to free up some time. And I think we have everybody involved that wants to be doing more for interventions and prevention. And we're trying to do that. It's just we need more resources to hire more people. Because, especially for my staff, they're all doing 2 duties and working overtime. And if you're up all night with a kid in police protective custody, how are you going to be here for your regular 8 to 4 when you've been sitting up with 3-year-olds all night? So it's just a matter of money. And like I said, I plan to go after opiate settlement funds. I know Mark Mark hears me all the time talking about that. So.
Okay.
I just think we all need to talk to our representatives, try to get support.
And I think that with kind of a change in viewing things or successes and things, I think that now that the grant for the Veterans Court, I think that's going to go a long way of the community and all of the parties, interested parties and things, more embracing the success rates as we see the successes that are occurring with the veterans who are going through the Veterans Court. I think that at that point, perhaps then, there can be a shift in perception of what that type of intervention actually does accomplish.
Right, and I do hope the same thing, because ultimately, the more high-risk people that you're trying to help, the violent people who we don't always feel comfortable helping, that also are struggling with mental health and substance use, we reduce that tendency to commit violent crimes when we address the mental health and the substance use.
Right.
And when you see those veterans and you see people who are struggling with PTSD get violent, instead of just looking at the violent that makes us uncomfortable, we have to solve the issues that get them to that point. And so I am hopeful that as we open the gate for the Veterans Court, that eventually that will lead to us working with high-risk, high-needs population,
Right.
and really targeting the people who we see the most frequent, who are committing the most intense crimes, but can be dealt with at the community level and working, because everyone needs employees.
Okay. Anything else? Okay. We're good. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie.
I know we always take up more of your time, but we always get one question leads to another question, something like that. We appreciate what you do.
I'll answer all the questions.
It's so important. I mean,
Yeah, it is.
Look at our bill statements.
I know, I agree. Morning.
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 Hey, Tom, before you get started, I just want to give a shout out to you on helping Joy for Ichiban. She said you stopped by out in Lansing, the restaurant, and gave her some valuable information after I requested that and went through Mark to do that. And she told me today she's very appreciative of that.
Great.
I just happened to check out your lunch yesterday to make sure everything was okay.
Very good.
I appreciate it.
Super. And that's an example of one of the things I've really been working on lately is and it's always a good sign when you see an influx of small business questions and small business concerns, and, how do I start a business? How do I, enhance what I've done in my business? And I've seen a lot of that over the past 6 months, and that's always a very encouraging sign of any community. As far as my quarterly report goes, really just kind of want to cover some key things that we've been working on. The economic development policy, while we do have a draft of it, I've been spending some time kind of fine-tuning those particular industries, if we want to target particular industries, as well as perhaps some residential development incentives or assistance that we can provide in that policy as well. Continuing to build relationships with the communities within Leavenworth County, as well as our outside agencies that we work with. Also continue to work with each community to figure out exactly what they want to do in their communities. As a county economic developer, really one of my primary goals and responsibilities is to provide ancillary support to those cities to sort of supplement some of their city staff as well to kind of allow them to accomplish some of their goals. The county website currently does not emphasize economic development at all. So putting together a portion or a new addition to the site that really kind of defines the role of economic development through the county government. LCDC at some point in the future will launch a new business park task force, if you will, to identify the needs, desires, process, location, et cetera, of future business parks. The urgency of that kind of hinges on a couple of projects that are outstanding right now, and we'll kind of see where those go over the next couple of months. But that's certainly on the books as well. I've been added as a board member to the Leavenworth Lansing Chamber of Commerce, which I think is great. It kind of gets us out and kind of defines our new role to a broader audience. Made a presentation to the Tonganoxie Business Association a few weeks ago, and that was fantastic to get to know those folks as well. Currently reviewing the comprehensive plan with the Planning and Zoning Department here at the county to to really identify, where our future growth is and who's in roles and responsibilities of really partnering economic development and planning. They really work better when they are going forward hand in hand, and that's the thing that we're working on right now. A new labor shed study was actually released and completed for LCDC a few weeks ago, reviewing that updated study as well. I already mentioned the small business concerns and contacts that have been kind of flooding in lately. Last month, I attended the International Economic Development Council annual conference, and really, and during that conference, you can kind of define what your educational tract is going to be, because they have hundreds of seminars and sessions to attend. I really spent most of my time focusing on business park development strategies and rural development strategies, and I think that information will play into what we're doing here at the county over time. Also attended the Wichita State University Economic Forecast last month. And Wichita State actually has an incredibly powerful economic analysis group. So they provide some great insight. Some that is more interesting than others. While a lot of states, even states that have less to offer than the state of Kansas does over the past few years, have absolutely added fairly dramatic numbers to their population, Kansas has actually lost 5,000 people. Now, 5,000 people in Kansas, in general, we're really not talking about a whole lot of the total population. But it is interesting to see that the population actually slightly went down. And one of the folks that we spoke with is actually the chief economist for ZipRecruiter. And right now there are 10.5 million jobs available, and ZipRecruiter posts about 9.5 million of those. So this person actually knows kind of what they're talking about. But really the only thing that she could point to as to why Kansas lost population is at least the perception of our average wage. And this is a working wage. This doesn't include people who are on disability or don't work for one reason or another. These are people with jobs. Looking at that average, in Kansas, that average is about $53,000 per working person, where the national average is $67,000. So really, that chief economist really sort of pointed to what we pay people in the state of Kansas for the time being. And you can certainly argue there's a cost of living adjustment, and there's a difference between somebody making a wage here versus somewhere else. But regardless, people right now, as they are much more mobile through COVID, people in organizations have determined that people don't have to show up at an office every day. You can have an office in St. Louis, but actually work in Toledo, Ohio, if you want to, and still make it happen. But through that, people have kind of skipped over the comparison to cost of living versus their wage. They're just looking at that wage number particularly. Interestingly enough, they also provide a recession outlook. And right now, generally speaking, about the vast majority of economists will stop short of saying there's a 100% chance we go into a recession, but they're pretty comfortable saying it's 98% chance. And what that looks like is still kind of up in the air. No one anticipates it really being a dramatic, a particularly dramatic event. However, they are looking at I guess really going into recession this fall at some point. It wouldn't be a long term. It would probably bounce back by the end of next summer. But that's kind of where we are and what that may look like. It's anticipated that employment will peak sometime in the first quarter of next year, and then it'll kind of start to go down a little bit more. And when I say employment peaking, that means the job outlook and all these businesses that are looking for labor, it's going to be about as good as it's going to get for a while. And then probably go back down a little bit the final 3 quarters of next year. And on that note, of course, workforce does continue to be the number one issue nationwide as well as in Kansas and around here. I mentioned there are 10.5 million open positions. There's roughly 5.5 million people looking for jobs. So that's a pretty big delta or a pretty big gap. And that explains why if you've gone to a hotel, basically over the past 3 years, if you've gone to a hotel, the chances of you getting fresh towels every day is pretty slim. Because those service sectors have really been hit with shortages of labor, as has really industry across the board. But that phenomenon is actually anticipated to hold true through 2026. So there's not a quick fix to the national labor shortage at this point. And as I said, all positions are kind of struggling. As the presentation we had just before mine mentioned, there is a such thing as compassion fatigue or just flat out work fatigue in general from not enough people doing the work of quite a few folks. It was also interesting that this wasn't really an indictment of the current labor market, but it's very difficult to fill positions now. And I think we've experienced that a bit at the county as well. But because of that, performance standards have actually dropped a bit as well. Where 5 or 10 years ago, if you don't show up for work, maybe it's 2 or 3 strikes and you're out. Well, now it's somewhere between probably 15 and 20 strikes and you're out. Because it's easier to kind of forgive that transgression than it is to go out and find somebody else in the current market. And of course, the workforce does impact what we see as far as new projects. If you can't find the people, you can't have the project. Supply chains and et cetera, all the stuff that we continue to see over the past few years. And finally, and this is not our project, but I get a lot of questions about Panasonic and what they're doing in DeSoto, just south of the county. They are incredibly close to our county, but it is another community's project. They're actually breaking ground to some degree this morning. Yes. We don't know everything that's happening with that project, and the reason we don't at this point is because they're still working under a number of non-disclosure agreements until they get some stuff figured out. And I think right now they still have not necessarily some challenges, but they have some unresolved issues as in regard to identifying the logistics of their project, how supplies and materials, some of those materials do have a relatively brief shelf life before they're packaged into the battery. So it's how can they expeditiously get those raw materials and materials from the West Coast to Kansas in short order with the most expeditious service that still maintains the integrity of their product. I think they may have already also opened an employment office, starting to identify those 4,000 people that they're going to need for that facility. As it relates to Leavenworth County, I believe that I think it's a pretty valid estimate to assume that we will see an uptick in interest in housing developments, residential projects, residential developments, as well as some supply opportunities as well for suppliers. Typically, when you look at the investment and the addition of a major plant, really anywhere, you see a lot of the, conventional wisdom suggests, well, all the suppliers are going to be right up around the building. Typically, that's not really the case. They tend to spread out anywhere from 40 minutes to an hour and a half away from that plant. So I think we definitely fit in that sweet spot of being, a safe option or a reasonable option for some of those supply shops to open up. So I've also provided another, basically a market snapshot for your review, much as I did the last time. But with that, I'll entertain any questions you may have.
Questions? Mike?
A couple questions. Where we're talking about the desires of communities, and I didn't hear you mention anything about the regional transportation study and how that fits together
Absolutely.
With the desires of the communities.
Absolutely.
And how we get every community to kind of identify, get on the same page.
Exactly.
On road project 1, 2, and 3, so
Definitely.
that we can get the
Definitely.
funding.
And we are nearing that. We had a conference call, video call last week. Or actually the group kind of spearheading the transportation study had a number of conference calls with a number of different groups. I was obviously in the economic development group. And the results of these interactions, these little sessions, are going to culminate, I believe, in December. And at some point, the entire group is going to come back and make a presentation to you. But right now, they're all kind of trying to get the ideas and desires relative to transportation understood from all potential stakeholders that would be in that. And there'll be citizens groups. In fact, if it's not already on our website or our Facebook page, it should be really soon. There are going to be a couple of open houses in Leavenworth County for residents and citizens to show up and identify what their desires would be specifically relative to transportation within the county. So that's absolutely moving forward, and I think we'll hear more about it as the months go.
Now, we have transportation within the county and getting state funding, but we also have like ARPA and the large funding
Right.
to identify like these mega project funds
Exactly.
as they become available. Are we going to target this bridge?
Right.
Are we going to have
Absolutely.
that on our goals?
Absolutely.
Is that
That's exactly how it's going to work. That's exactly how it's going to work. And right now, the vast majority of the projects, and again, I'm doing this from the top of my head, I think the vast majority of potential projects out there are somewhere between $5 and $30 million each. we do have at least one big project like the bridge that's significantly more than that. So.
Now, on the development of the Future Business Park Task Force, I know we visited about Leavenworth County does not have any rail access anymore, and we've turned multiple projects and businesses down because of that.
Exactly.
Is that on the...
It will. And honestly, that's something I mentioned, but the task force has not been composed at this point. And it's it will be. But again, right now we have some vacancy in existing business parks, so there shouldn't be a real rush to go identify the next one unless we really need that space. But in simply planning and looking ahead, I think that group's probably going to come together over the next few months once we find out about some projects that are currently out there and how they fall. But no, I think rail is something that we've got to look at and how that ties into really the rest of the metro and what it can provide our county in particular as far as opportunities and just new assets that could be put in place, especially for warehouse distribution operations, which is by far the most prevalent industrial type project that's on the market, industrial type product that's on the market right now. And it's not just the Amazons and the Walmarts and whoever else is, but many organizations now are minimizing traditional retail, if you will, and simply going online or through electronic sources to where they want to get it delivered to your home or residence or business as quick as possible. So we're seeing warehouses and distribution centers pop up in places that you never have dreamed that they'd pop up before. I mean, heck, there are two giant buildings right next to the Kansas Speedway. And, if you 10 years ago, if you went back and looked at a planning map and said, yeah, at some point we're going to put two giant warehouses here, people would have booed you out of town and thought you were nuts. But that's kind of the state of the economy right now, and just the state of retail and sales and distribution and everything. So, but going back to your initial question, a huge component of that is there aren't a lot of places that do have significant rail access to feed those chunks of the supply chain, being those warehouses and distribution centers.
So when you make changes proposed to the comprehensive plan, are you going to kind of incorporate those in?
I think we'll look at those. I mean, right now I'm simply evaluating some portions that pertain specifically to economic development, but I will have time in the next couple of weeks to kind of go through the entire thing as well with planning and zoning. So.
Okay. Now we had requested or made a suggestion that Leavenworth County have a person on the executive board of LCDC. They did not accept that. Were you involved in any of those conversations?
I was not.
Okay. That's all.
Yeah, just one thing. You mentioned that Kansas had lost 5,000 residents. Did that mean the bordering states have all gained?
Not necessarily, because, and again, the past 3 years have been pretty unique because a lot of people were, and this is really fascinating to me just from a people standpoint. When a lot of people were told that they could work from home during COVID, they interpreted that as I can move to the mountains forever. And that's really what's happened, is that people have moved to wherever they've wanted to move. So I don't think it's necessarily the surrounding states. I think it's some distance away.
Okay. Makes sense. Yeah. Jeff, Vicki? Yes, guys.
No, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you.
Tom.
Thank you.
Good information. I appreciate it, Tom. Okay, we'll go to an additional public comment. Nancy Carpenter. Come on down, Nancy. Good morning.
Repeat after me. Nancy Carpenter, 14681 Crider Road, Bonner Springs, Kansas.
Welcome.
Thank you. Lately, I have been going back in my mind to decisions made by this BOCC regarding road usage in Leavenworth County. I'd like to remind you of two such decisions. One was made on February 26, 2020, when the BOCC denied a temporary permit that would have allowed the Brew to Brew Run, a charity event, to use Leavenworth County roads for one day. For almost 45 minutes, the commissioners bantered back and forth about the permit. One stated that, quote, our job is to worry about safety, end quote. Another spoke about Linwood's opposition to the run going through their town and how residents in the area did not want this event. Yet another said that residents were upset that trash was thrown on their property and that residents felt disrespected by those involved in the race. The county sheriff detailed complaints that were fielded by their department following the previous year's event. The surge in complaints, along with safety concerns, led the sheriff to say that a permit should not be issued. When a vote was finally taken, the permit was denied. 2 commissioners, who still sit on this board, commented that they voted to deny the permit because they supported the sheriff's recommendation. I point this out as you have a letter from that same sheriff dated March 27, 2020, in reference to Kaw Valley's proposed sand hauling route. You followed the sheriff's recommendation and denied a permit for a 1-day charity run along some of the same roads that Kaw Valley wishes to use in its proposed project. It makes sense that you would heed his words when looking at a project that would span 20-plus years. In the letter's conclusion, the sheriff says, quote, "I believe the increased commercial traffic on roadways not specifically designed for such use will be a detriment to those who travel these roads and live along the route." I encourage you to reread his entire letter, then decide if his words mean less to you since there is a business involved. Would you be comfortable allowing the safety of your citizens to take a back seat to the profits of a sand company? Another instance that came to mind was just last week when you refused to approve a letter of support for the U.S. Bicycle Route 55 through Leavenworth County. Commissioner Cause, in particular, was concerned that the roads selected were not the safest, even commenting on the fact that in places there were no shoulders. There was talk of high-risk rural roads and how adding another layer of risk to an already high-risk road wasn't a good idea. Your concern for cyclists is admirable. I don't know that Kaw Valley's proposed haul route has ever been investigated as one to classify as high risk. Perhaps it should be. After all, there are inadequate shoulders along much of the route, along with non-recoverable slopes and steep drop-offs. With the soon-to-be-built Panasonic battery plant in DeSoto, more commuter car traffic could end up using that route. Could you, in good conscience, jeopardize the safety of non-commercial drivers by layering on the risk of heavy commercial truck traffic along a dangerous route? Something to consider as you hear from Kaw Valley. I could go on, but we'll leave you there for today. You have much to consider as you move towards November 30th when, quote, "the issue of the Kaw Valley SUP and all issues related thereto," end quote, is on the agenda. You have a chance to correct the mistake you made on July 15th, 2020, when you approved an SUP for Kaw Valley that favored business over the safety of your citizens. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your comments. Okay, that's the only one we had for public, so I'll go around the room and say, Jeff, you start with you.
I don't have anything. City Leavenworth meeting last night. Nothing big on their work session.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Vicki?
I had 2 Kansas City Area Transit Authority meetings this week. That's 2, one Monday and one yesterday. But they lasted less than an hour each, so they were both subcommittee meetings. That's it.
That's it, okay. I have just a couple. Last Thursday, Lansing Council is in discussion with the fire district and how they're going to go forward with that after the Kansas Supreme Court made their ruling. Also this Friday, I'll be attending the LCDC VIP banquet out in Basel. That's all I have. Doug?
I just had Basher City Council last week, last Wednesday night, and I had Fairmount Township last Thursday.
Thank you, Doug. Mike?
I do not have anything to report.
Take a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Commissioner Carlson?
Aye.
Commissioner Connors?
Aye.
I vote aye. Commissioner Smith?
Aye.
Commissioner Stevens?